Welcome to Ian Weekly, and this is your host, Todd DeVoe. Today we're going to be talking to Dr. Paul Stoltz, who is considered the world's leading authority in integration and application of grit and resilience. He's the premier expert on the science of mindset. He's an international bestseller and a keynote speaker. Dr. Stoltz has been on ABC, CBS, NBC, The Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN, you name it, he's been there. He's also a guest lecturer at MIT and at Stanford University, and he's a part of the Distinguished Lecture Series with the Millennial Thinker for Singapore. He's been called the Thought Leader of the Year in Hong Kong, and is a top-rated international faculty member for the Young Presidents Organization. So it's happy to have Dr. Stoltz here.
And on to our interview after a short commercial break.
Emergencies happen, whether they're related to medical emergencies, threats of physical violence, weather-related, or other. One of the most difficult things during an emergency is to find help and quickly and efficiently communicate with all parties, regardless of whether you're an administrator, law enforcement, or the end user. With Titan HST, we help to store time by creating high-tech yet simple-to-use mobile-based applications that connect you with the people who can help you. At Titan HST, we believe in the power of people.
315 and 314, there is at least one person that's been shot. Somebody is still shooting inside. 453, I have a party shot here. I need rescue hot.
Are you ready for the unthinkable? Call our friends at High Speed TACMed. They provide custom emergency planning and training that saves lives. With years of experience in law enforcement, search and rescue, responding to and managing large-scale incidents, HSTM will evaluate and prepare written plans, training sessions, drills, and debriefs, leaving you with the necessary tools and experience that can save lives. Call HSTM today to discuss your specific needs, and the staff of High Speed TACMed will help ensure that you're ready and are in complete compliance. Call High Speed TACMed today, 805-419-0024. Again, that's 805-419-0024. The friendly staff at HSTM is standing by.
Bringing out bodies now. Get someone to the back as soon as you can. Rescue personnel. I got at least 3 to 7 hits.
How did you get into your line of work? This is kind of fascinating to me.
Short version is this. Ever since I was a really young kid, I've just been really fascinated about the difference between the people who keep the lights on and those who seem to dim prematurely. And I always wanted to understand sort of what's underneath all that and what really fuels all that. And that fascination, I guess, led me to my research, which really started in my undergrad days and sort of evolved into sort of this never-ending quest to excavate down to the bedrock of human endeavor and try to really understand, what's the sort of deepest, most solid foundation we can discover about what really underlies everything we attempt to do in life and our chances of success in making that happen. So, that's just always been an obsession of mine, and it's something I just wake up caring about with, burning passion every day.
That's great. When I was reading through the book G.R.I.T, it was really kind of hit home about how we do things and the people that kind of get into this business of emergency managers and first responders and the military, the people who I've always been aligned with in my life. And I can see how a lot of this applies to it. And I know in some cases, those of us that are in this business forget that we are that person who does keep the lights on, and sometimes for millions of people. So with G.R.I.T,
So true.
how can emergency managers or first responders apply the lessons that you have, not just in your book G.R.I.T, but also in your website and the other work that you're doing?
Yeah, I just got to say, the people who take on that responsibility are just my absolute heroes. I mean, you think about, one of my premises is, if you want to gauge the importance of anything, remove it. So if you want to gauge the importance of emergency responders, remove them. And look at the world of mess that we'd be in without them. So for people going to that line of work says a lot. But, there's a difference between intention, effectiveness, and the long-term toll it takes. So what I'm really concerned about and care about, I should say, about the people who might be listening to this is, first of all, how do you optimize the way you respond so that you can bring the optimal response to the people you're serving? And then number two, how do we fortify your robustness so that rather than it taking a toll on you over time, physically, mentally, emotionally, over time, have it be something that really just sort of hones and strengthens you as a human being so that you're kind of what I call weird in a good way, so that, doing the toughest work, which is often the most thankless job, which is often the most demanding thing, having that be something that in a sort of almost at a cellular level, you really can thrive upon. When most people, as we know, who are dealing with people who are on the front lines of a desperate need for care and help, often get beaten up and beaten up pretty badly. So that's what I care about. So going to your question about so really what can we do? There's a couple things that come to mind. One is a big piece of my work that was the pioneering piece we did is we realized, you know what, and this speaks right to the heart of what you guys are all about. And I think probably why we're having this conversation is that at the heart of it all is how people, what happens to a human being when they confront adversity. Mm-hmm. And you guys are on the front lines of adversity every day. I mean, you're the ones who are going into the storm and dealing with some of the gnarliest, ugliest, toughest, scariest stuff out there. And so if you're going to be that human being that turns into the storm, you want to bring your optimal response. And what I discovered is, hey, guess what? Person's AQ, their hardwired pattern of how they respond to adversity, dramatically outpaces your IQ in terms of how well you do in the world. So there's 4 core, let's get super practical, right? And there are 4, here's what the science says. And, we've had a chance to vet and test this over the past 30 years with more than 1 million people in all different walks of life in almost every country on the planet. And there's 4 core dimensions of how you respond to adversity. And this has 2 sides for you guys. One is yourself, first and foremost, and then second of all, how you help others do this. So CORE stands for control, ownership, reach, and endurance. Control is when the stuff hits the fan, what facets of the situation can you potentially influence? Your perceived ability to influence whatever happens next. So what's interesting is people with high AQs, honestly, they can't even imagine something you can't influence, even if it's just the ability of that person to take the next breath, And then people who score lower on AQ tend to feel a bit of learned helplessness, especially in the face of crisis or disaster. They feel like, it's out of my control. I hope someone figures out something. And that helplessness can be crushing. So even in the most overwhelming circumstances, so take something really radical, like a massive terrorist attack or multi-point attack or all the worst case scenarios that many emergency responders are training for today. If that really happened, the nanoseconds of the response inside of you and the immediate, ever strengthening instinct to just focus on the facets of the situation, whatever they are that you can potentially influence right now, is the difference between life and death. The second part, ownership, is about how you step up, the likelihood to actually step up and do anything to improve the situation, no matter honestly how bad it is or whose job it may formally be to do that. People who score lower on this, they tend to sort of step back. They become almost like I joke about government bureaucrats, because they sort of go, well, that's not in my job classification, but, you're welcome to contact the people. Well, people are dying, okay? If you're in a crisis situation or in a true emergency response, regardless of your role, regardless of your formal or informal authority or power, how do you step up to gain the most immediate positive impact on the situation to the benefit of the most people possible? That's the ownership part. So control and ownership, as you can see, just those 2 just spew action and energy and proactivity and a positive power into the world. And they also create followers because people notice this. I'm talking nanoseconds here. If your emergency response in any facet of any facet of it. You're so trained to be able to handle tough situations and handle them quickly. We're talking about that next level where you are the one who is able to do it quicker and better, ever quicker, ever better than the people around you. Then we have reach and endurance. Reach is really powerful because it's about when adversity strikes, how far do you perceive it's going to reach into and affect everything else? People with lower AQs tend to perceive it as reaching into and affecting everything else. So, there were people like when 9/11 hit who thought it was the end of the world. There were people who, with global warming think, the world's ending. There are people who have one bad thing happen and there goes their whole day. There are people who, kid calls in sick on the way in to do your shift and people and they're short-handed and, and things are messed up and technology is not working and everything else, who just feel like their world's spiraling out of control. The thing to focus on is two things. One is what can you do, no matter how bad it is, to minimize the potential downside. And this one sounds really weird, but how do you maximize the potential upside? In other words, in the worst imaginable circumstances, what can you do to generate more hope, to generate more help, to generate more healing, to generate more possibilities, to generate a better response and outcome right now when most people think it's only going down? How do you create an up? And that's an incredibly game-changing question and response piece to be asking. So control, ownership, reach, and then endurance is one we can affect so much because it's the question of how long when it hits, how long do you perceive it's going to last or endure? And if you're emergency response and you feel like your shift's going to last forever, or you're never going to get home and you're never going to get some rest, or this mess is going to take forever to get through, or you just see this sort of downward spiral and how things are going, and it may be your leadership, it may be, any number of things that are just making it hard for you. Being able to see and get past the adversity better and faster than everyone else is just an incredibly powerful thing to do. And that's what emergency response is. I mean, this is the core of emergency response, which is an emergency management, which is how do you focus on what you can influence, step up and do whatever you can as quickly as possible, minimize the downside, maximize the upside, and get past this whole thing as quickly as possible. That is the core response that determines the effectiveness of emergency management and emergency response. I mean, that is the DNA of adversity response, not just according to the science we've vetted and proven over these years, but to the real time, in the moment, boots on the ground, make it happen now stuff that we're training people to do, and that is more important than ever.
That's great. It's funny you say that because I know some people who do emergencies and disasters really well, but their daily function is sometimes a little bit more harder for them to do. The mundane stuff they just can't handle. It's kind of funny that you say that. That's kind of in our DNA, and I can understand that completely.
Well, you hit a great one, Todd, because here's what we found. This validates what you're saying, which is there are a lot of people who are adversity junkies, and they become kind of adrenaline junkies. And they, if something bad happens, they are on fire and at their best. It is the mucky day-to-day, more mundane that just stops them. And so the same stuff, the same core response applies to the little and the big, Mm-hmm. And the other part of this, so, there's two parts, which is the second thing I said I wanted to kind of talk to you about is there's a thing in the world of material science that emergency management people run into all the time, which is called robustness. And this comes from our world of grit. And robustness is, how well do you stand up to the unexpected, or also what's the wear and tear factor over time? And, in emergency management and emergency response, I think of it kind of like sandpaper, because most people you meet are kind of like cheap sandpaper. You go to Home Depot, man, and you go up and go, I'm going to buy some sandpaper with some serious grit. Well, as soon as you start to put that grit to use, guess what? It starts to wear thin. It starts to wear down. And pretty soon you don't have so much grit. Same thing applies here. The story I always tell, and I think I told it to your group, Todd, a while back, there was a guy, that sort of artisan, craftsman, woodworker guy, who was doing some work on our house. And I wanted to see his shop. I wanted to see, what's this guy all about? So I went to his shop, and I said, so show me, how this all works and what you do and what you're passionate about. And he reaches inside this hand-carved box that he had obviously done that was amazing, that alone. And then he lifts the lid, and he pulls out this scroll of weird-looking paper, and he starts to unfurl it. And I said, what's that? He goes, in this very reverential tone, he goes, that's my sandpaper. And I said, wow, why do you keep it in there? And he goes, Paul, I don't know if you know this, but there's a kind of sandpaper that if you use it right, gets better over time, gets better with use. And I thought, wow, that's it. Because when you think about, being in the world of emergency management, emergency response, you're feasting on adversity every day. That's your day job. And so the question is, you may enter it with a lot of grit, and you may even enter a new shift with a lot of grit. You may enter a new week with a lot of grit. But what happens over the course of a day, of the week, of the month, over the years of doing it? Think of the burnout that we see in this field. That's so tragic, because with that burnout, we lose effectiveness, and with that burnout, we lose wisdom and experience that can be the difference between life and death. We lose something really precious, first inside ourselves, but of course for the collective good, which is what you sign up for when you do this line of work. So being more robust and thinking about ways to do that is really, really important. And, we can talk about that, but I think that point about what it does to you is big. And the other part of that point, Todd, which you nailed, is the why. It doesn't matter if you're in healthcare. It doesn't matter if you're in emergency response. It doesn't matter, what field. If you're dealing with human beings on the front line, and it's mucky and bureaucratic and filled with idiots sometimes and incompetence and all this kind of stuff that can just make you crazy, you have to go back to the why. Because I'm guessing every single person who's listening to this would answer the question if I said, why did you go into this? Besides just making a paycheck and having a job, you're going into it because at some reason you care about making a difference in people's lives. And you probably love it in a way because you can see so materially and immediately the kind of difference you can make in people's lives. But the problem is, idiots and stuff and muck gets in the way, and that why can dim. And you're going in for another shift, and you can kind of forget the raw power of why you went into this in the first place. And it's like I always say, Todd, without the why, you lose the try.
Right.
That would be tragic. So those things, the why, the robustness, and the core response, I think are the very DNA of what makes one great versus hate what you do.
Yeah, you're right about the burnout, and it's kind of interesting because I have some really good friends that are near the end of our careers. Both we're the older guys, and it does sometimes get a little bit harder to get up in the morning and throw the uniform on and do what you have to do, because you're right, the why sometimes it goes away, especially with some of the guys in law enforcement today that see this anti-law enforcement trend happening. At least I feel like it's that way, and sometimes that why does get hard. And then you get that one call, the one time that you get out there, and you see the great humanity again, and it says, okay, yeah, this is why I'm doing it. I am here to make a difference, and you're right. I think that's why a lot of guys and gals get into this business. So I tend to
you nailed it, Todd. The one thing, just a quick thought on that is that you sparked, which is, here's the difference between the best and the rest. The best You know, the best are the ones who find a way to help people and do their job in spite of all the people and all the things that conspire against them. And by the way, that may be the person they're trying to help. I mean, think
Yeah.
of everyone who's any kind of, and that's what I mean about law enforcement. It's like, I'm going to make you safer in spite of yourself. I'm going to help you in spite of you. I'm gonna make this world a better place in spite of all the idiots and short-sightedness that is pervading the airspace out there, and the lack of appreciation and understanding for who we are and what we do. I'm gonna show up and I'm gonna do this noble work in spite of all that.
Yeah, that's not true. I'll tell you a quick story, personal story. We had this guy that was he was an older gentleman, homeless, or at least he liked to be on the streets a lot. And every time we would go, when this was when I was working as a paramedic, and we'd drive with our lights and sirens past him, he'd get mad at us and flip us off and yell at us. And, one time he even threw a rock at us and, whatever, we just let it go. And then it was a few weeks later or whatever, we ended up running on him, and he has having a heat stroke. And, of course we went in there and we treated him just like he would if he was, never that way to us. And it's kind of ironic that was like we get there, we go, oh, it's him. This is ironic. Now we got to treat this guy who always hates us. So but we do it.
Exactly, and they could be cursing at you while you're helping them.
Yeah, I've had that happen a few times. I'll tell you another quick story. We had this guy who was a heroin user, overdosed. We pushed the Narcan on him to reverse the effects of the heroin, and then he got mad at us because we ruined his high. And we saved his life. The guy was going into respiratory arrest. We saved his life, and he got mad at us for ruining his high. So that's grateful for you. But yeah, so
amazing, isn't it? Well,
it is. So I took your grit score, your grit gauge, and
yeah.
I got these numbers. I don't know I kind of know what they mean by what it tells me, but I got a 338 overall.
Nice.
My R score was a 55. And then my quality is a 94. Now I know it's kind of funny because I focus on that R score because according to your thing, it's a little bit below average. How do I improve that? How can I improve my R score?
Well, grit is growth, resilience, instinct, and tenacity, G.R.I.T. And, the quality of grit that you show, that number is high. And the reason that matters so much before we lose that point is, you're talking about the difference between good grit and bad grit, which is the effect you have on the people around you as you go around doing what you do and go after your goals. And, yours is strong and high. And the other thing is smart grit and dumb grit. I mean, think about how many people you meet, especially in the line of work we're talking about here, that demonstrate dumb grit. They got a lot of grit. It's just not terribly smart in terms of going after it in ways that work. So, hats off to you for that score. The resilience score that you have, we kind of nailed it. It almost circles directly back to the core because resilience is based on the core response, control, ownership, reach, and endurance. And what sometimes happens when someone has a below average score like this, it might be in the case of you, is you might have really strong, or one could have really strong sort of control and ownership, but they feel like things are bigger and last longer than they like or than they need to, and that can weigh so heavily on you that can bring your score down, unintentionally, but also with some consequence. So I would say just go back to, immediately focusing on the things you can influence, how you step up, how do you minimize the downside, and here's the secret one: grow that upside and get past whatever adversity it is as quickly as possible. You do that with kind of everything in life, and it has this incredibly energizing and resilience building effect. That is the DNA of resilience.
That's good stuff, man. I do. And in your book, I've read it. I read it straight through, and then I keep going back and looking at different parts of it. And I just really enjoy the story of KK that's in here, and he's really an inspiring guy. How did you meet KK exactly?
Yeah, I met him through KK. Is an amazing guy. He was obviously an Iranian refugee. He was raised in a dirt poor family in a ghetto of Iran as immigrants, and they were detested by their neighbors because they were different. And he lived in constant danger. Literally had to stuff newspapers in his shoes to walk through the snow miles to school, and he would have to fight, literally fight, to just be able to take a loaf of bread home to his family for dinner, because if they didn't eat that, they didn't have dinner. And he grew up in a very scrappy way. When he came to the U.S. with $300 in his pocket, no English language and no visa and nothing to look forward to, and kind of built this global empire since then. And today, at 77 years old, is the most fit human being I've ever seen. He is more ripped, more fit than probably anyone listening to this, no matter how amazing they may be. He's breathtaking. He does mixed martial arts 3 hours a day with Chuck Liddell, who was the world champion, and he can, squat 1,200 pounds. I mean, the guy's just phenomenal, right? And so the way I met him is he loves to give back. And he thought, I live in this college town in San Luis Obispo where there's Cal Poly, and I want to do an event. I want to help young people see their possibilities. And when he was a young kid who was on a wrestling team and had nothing, he was invited to tour Hearst Castle, which is this amazing castle from William Randolph Hearst out here on the Central Coast. It's unbelievable. You can't even believe that it exists. He saw it and he said, someday KK will have castle. So he did it. It took him 10 years, but he built a castle up the road from Hearst Castle. That's his castle on the coast. And he invited all these students to come. And he reached out to me. He heard who I was and what I do, and he wanted my help in really reaching the students and impacting their lives. So that's how we met. And he's just that kind of guy. You know what he does? He drives through the toughest neighborhoods and hidden dark pockets of cities around the world, places no human being should go, and where a lot of emergency response people probably are forced to go. And he just goes there to find the most down and out broken people, and he picks them up and he helps them. He doesn't just give them money. He'll drive them to a hotel, get them showered and cleaned up, feed them a meal, help give them some hope, and just get them started. It doesn't matter if they're prostitutes, drug users, criminals, homeless, whatever it might be. He just does that silently without telling anyone, and misses his airplane flights in various cities around the world all the time because he has to do it. He can't not do it.
Sounds like my kind of guy,
Yeah, he's a pretty cool guy.
Yeah, I just he inspires me, and he kind of in one aspect, kind of a shameful kind of way. I'm like, I did read in the book about how in shape he was and how much he works out. And I go, man, if this guy could do it, how come I'm not out there doing it? But it's a good thing. It's a good motivation,
It is, and he's done a lot of work with people in your field because they so respect him. They just see that fire in his eye and the strength with which he carries himself and his determination. And he's the kind of guy you would follow to the ends of the earth. I mean, if the stuff hits the fan, I mean, KK is one of those guys you turn to and go, okay, I know you're going to figure out a way to make this okay.
That's awesome. Yeah, the reason why I asked the question about KK is because if anybody, and I highly recommend reading this book, by the way, everybody out there, but if anybody doesn't read the book just for the sake of grit, of what you think it might be, you need to hear this guy's story because it's amazing. It is definitely amazing. So, okay, I have a couple last questions for you, sir. And this is the tough one, but I know that you're going to have a good answer because you did recommend a book when we had our conference that I went to. Can you name 2 books that you think somebody in emergency management or emergency response should read?
Boy, that's a great one. What would I say? An emergency management, emergency response. I think that reading there's a new book out called No Barriers, which is written by a friend of mine who is the blind guy who climbed Mount Everest and the 7 summits of the world. He also solo kayaked the Grand Canyon. He's 100% blind. He's the world's leading blind athlete. And the reason that's such a good book is because it kind of lays out this no barriers mindset that I work with him on. And it's he works with a lot of wounded warriors, a lot of people, in service and different facets of life. And it's such a powerful book, and he's just the real deal. So I think that's one for sure that I would pick. The other one that I think is useful is there's a book, I hate to recommend my own stuff, but there was a book we wrote together a while back, about 10 years ago, called The Adversity Advantage. And it talks about some of the specifics of what we've introduced a little bit on this conversation, but puts it in a really practical context and application. And the reason I mention that is we've had a lot of people in emergency management, emergency response, even, healthcare and other things, pick it up in the services, obviously in the armed services and everything else. So those two, I think, would be really applicable to your world, and hopefully stirring and moving and motivating and inspiring as well.
That's awesome. Hey, yeah. I mean, tell me about. I mean, you have some really good books out there, and I've only read one so far, and I'm definitely going to pick up The Advantage now that you talk about Adversity Advantage. It's funny. I heard an interview with I forget his name, the gentleman with no barriers. I heard an interview with him just the other day on NPR, and that was definitely one.
Oh yeah, that's right, Eric Weinmeier. Yep.
Yeah,
his name is Eric Weinmeier, and he would have been on NPR the other day. You're right. He and I did the Today Show together and a bunch of the big shows. We've done a lot of work around the world. And I just got to tell you, the guy's just 100% the real deal. I mean, I don't know anyone mentally tougher than that guy.
He was telling the story about how he got stuck in an eddy, and it was his first time he was kayaking, and just kind of how he got out of it. He said that was before he even knew what was going on down the river, before they started using radios to communicate. So that was kind of a funny story. Last question for you, and this is all about you, sir. Why don't you go ahead and tell us, how do we get in touch with you? If somebody wants to, go to your website, get your books, just kind of, if somebody out there who's wants to have you come and be a guest speaker, how do we get a hold of you?
Super easy. We're Peak Learning, PEAK, peaklearning.com. You can go there. There's an info at peaklearning.com, which is a super easy way to just get right through me. They always send me everything. And Twitter handles Dr. Grit. And, we're out there on all the social media and all that kind of stuff. So really easy. Just reach out that way. And, anybody who sends me a message, I guarantee you, I promise I will respond just like you do every day.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being here today, sir. It was always a pleasure. And I look forward to hearing you again. And I was so happy that when I was at Coastline Community College for our kickoff this year, that you were there, and I was able to hear you speak. And it was definitely one of those events I'm glad that I went to. I almost didn't go, believe it or not. And I'm glad that I ended up going.
Hey, I'm glad you did. I'm glad we hooked up. I'm glad we got to do this. And, hats off again to everybody who's listening to this and everyone you work with every day, Tom.
Awesome. And maybe someday soon I can have you back?
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure. I'd love it. And we'll continue the conversation.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody, thank you so much for listening today. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me again with my email address. And also, we'll have Paul's information down in the show notes at the end of this, and also links to his page and his books as well. Thank you again, sir, for being here.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Bye.
Hi, this is Todd DeVoe, the host of EM Weekly's podcast. If you're trying to reach people in the emergency management and response space, EM Weekly is a place for you to advertise. Each week, we are bringing in guests from around the world to talk about best practices and trends in emergency management and response. We also have the blog on EM Weekly's website and the EM Quarterly e-magazine. For more information, please email Brian at emweekly.com. EM Weekly is a division of the WEMT Institute.